I'm going to start off with a bit of a story. It is the spring of 2012. About 25 young people walk into a room, and all of them are under the age of 21. About a third of them identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, or queer. Another third identify as people of color, and about 7 of them are men. Of the group, only 2 people in the room identify as feminists. All of them are there to discuss the relevance of feminism today. As we map out definitions, revisit history, and hear the everyday life experiences of discrimination and journeys towards justice, each of the participants is starting to accept that they just might be feminists. While some of them are still skeptical, the majority of them leave saying they have a better understanding of the term and that they can see a place for themselves in a movement that fights for gender equality, that fights for justice, that fights for self-determination, bodily autonomy, and the freedom to create family, find love, and construct ways to sustain them all. After the session is over, 2 young women, about 20 years old, hang back. One is a raven-haired South Asian woman, and the other is white with blonde hair and blue eyes. They both identify as straight, and both were sure as they walked into the session that they absolutely were not feminists. Having been told by other self-proclaimed feminists that they were not progressive enough to be worthy of the title, this is how they came to that conclusion. They bonded over shockingly similar stories of assumptions and judgment and ultimately rejection. They both came up to tell us, myself and my colleague Mary, who's sitting just to the right of me, or the left of you, that they were so happy that they came because they realized in that room, in that session, and in that moment that they were indeed feminists. They realized that their values and their everyday work, their commitments and lived realities reflected feminist ideals and values, that they gave far much too much power to other people by letting others dictate whether they're worthy or not. This is exactly how many of the young people who come to Choice USA begin to engage in sexual and reproductive health and rights. My colleague Mary has said of reproductive justice that it is not a label, but a mission. The mission of reproductive justice is to engage people who have been excluded from the movement or feel that they don't have a place in the work. The reality is that some people have been told that they are not and can't be pro-choice or feminist. Others have been told that they must put their commitments to racial equality or LGBTQ liberation or immigrant rights on hold if we are indeed going to win this war on women. Others have chosen to stay away because they didn't see anyone who looked like them. They hadn't seen themselves reflected in the movement. This resonated with me. I did not enter this movement as someone who identified as a feminist. I did not enter this movement as someone who called herself pro-choice, although looking back, I was. I didn't know it yet. I was not a part of the Women's Center or the Feminist Student Group. I was a part of the Black Student Alliance. I was a teaching assistant and counselor for TRIO programs that existed to ensure that first-generation students were recruited and retained at the University of Colorado at Boulder. It wasn't until my 16-year-old sister called and said, "I'm pregnant," that an opportunity presented itself for me to consider my personal feelings and my political feelings related to sexual and reproductive health and rights. I assumed she was going to have an abortion. She chose to parent. I watched her struggle. I watched someone who had supposedly made the right decision, the right choice, get tracked into a mommy school in South Florida, a place where they send young women who they no longer believe in or invest in. She dropped out of high school, and although was able to obtain her GED, has been met with barrier after barrier as she's struggled to be a good parent. It is at this point that I realized no matter what the decision, sex, abortion, pregnancy, parenting, that women and girls are subject to being judged wrong. It was then that I knew I was pro-abortion and so much more. It was then that I knew that I am pro-woman, I am pro-young people, I am pro-sex education, pro-child care, pro-affirmative action, pro-pleasure, pro-Medicaid, and pro-justice. I am in the business of ensuring young people always have a space to call their own as they are finding their way in this life dedicated to fighting for the right to sexual pleasure and sexual health, to a life dedicated to justice for all, to a life dedicated to making connections where others see none, to a life dedicated to claiming personal power and exercising collective power for the greater good. As Sandra laid out, reproductive justice means a commitment to centering the most marginalized. It is a commitment to resourcing grassroots leaders, community groups, and state-led efforts. It means that prioritizing race, class, orientation, immigration status has to be something more than a recruitment strategy. It means creating the space and opportunity for your policy agenda to change, for a restructure in the organization, for allowing new space for leadership to emerge that better reflects the new focus of the work and of the constituency. People often ask me, what does reproductive justice look like in practical application? I've got tons and tons of stories, but I'll just limit it to two. The first, are there any sex educators in the room? Anyone put a condom on a banana? Okay, all right, I'm talking to you. So Choice USA used to do a lot more sex education, peer sex education with students. And I remember when I first came on, I was the condom on the cucumber, condom on the banana girl. I'm thinking I'm so smart because I'm helping these young people figure out how to put on a condom because this is what they need, right? They just don't know how to use them. So one young woman, she raises her hand and she says, "Miss, first of all, I was in my 20s. I was like, did you just call me Miss? Miss, do you really want to know why we don't use condoms? And I was like, I don't know if I really want to know why you don't use condoms. Yes, I want to know. She says, actually, we know how to use them, and they're actually really not that hard to get. But if I have one in my purse, and my purse falls in the hallway, and it spills out into the hall, and someone sees it, all of a sudden I'm a whore. I'm a hoe. I'm a skank. If I pull that condom out with my boyfriend, I'm that kind of girl that prepares for sex. And she's judged in that way. Reproductive justice is about going deeper, right? We've got to address stigma. Right? It's not as easy as putting a condom in someone's hand and teaching her how to use it. There are other barriers there. I also, I've heard about, Latinos and Black people and how we don't, we're so anti-choice, anti-abortion. When we make assumptions like this, when we don't broaden our focus and our agenda, we miss a big opportunity. My father is 77 years old, and we didn't talk about politics in the house. And after I was on the job for 2 years, he said to me, I just don't know why anyone would feel that they have a right to tell a woman what to do with her body. I was like, I so love you right now. And it felt so good, and it felt like I missed something. We've got to tell our children and our nieces and our nephews and our grandchildren about the history, our personal history. I don't mean the history of icons, right? Of the people who controlled and kind of took up space, right? Who are in TV and magazines. I mean your history. I might have been in a different place, although I'm in a good place now, if I would have just known this black man and his history and his feelings and his politics about women and their bodies and their rights to abortion or to parent with dignity. We have to tell that story. As far as being a new voice for reproductive justice, I feel like I need to come out. I am not a millennial. Are there millennials in the room? Any millennials in the room? Anyone under the age of 30? Raise your hand. Word. Okay. Thank you for raising your hand and being present in the room. People often assume that I'm a millennial because of the ferocious way that I try to be a champion for not only their presence, but for their inclusion. I think oftentimes when we think about young people, our default is to put really pretty faces on websites, to put faces on marketing materials, right? To put them on the front lines, tell them to execute an already thought out strategy. And the reality is that young people are more than a face. They're the answer. They're the strategy. They're our way forward. I am not a millennial, but I feel honored to work for an organization that is committed to young people. Not a generation, but to young people. Choice USA was a point of entry for me when I thought I was young. I'm not so young anymore. And the plan is to continue to be around for generations to come. The generation after the millennials is already on the planet. I've been calling them Generation Awesome. Who knows, maybe they'll get to define themselves, because Lord knows we hated Generation X. Well, many of us did. No, I'm a Gen Xer, but I didn't like X. You didn't like X. You weren't like, hell yeah, I'm Gen X. Anyway, the oldest of Generation Awesome is already about 12 years old. And they are already thinking about and conversing about, not to mention engaging in a wide spectrum of sexual activity. Young people are a unique culture that will always need somewhere where they can ask hard questions. They will need a place where they are not judged, a venue where they can be cutting edge and experimental, a place where they can make mistakes and that those mistakes are valued as a part of learning, a place where they get to define the problems of the day and propose new creative solutions that are relevant to them. I am proud to be part of fortifying and leading an organization that will continue to be that place. I thank NCJW for honoring me and the work that I've done with young people and Choice USA, a place that creates new points of entry for young people to do the work of sexual and reproductive health and rights, to claim their feminist values, and to be loud and proud advocates of social justice. Thank you.